Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
So who tuning in was afraid of the dark growing up? Hey, who to this day is still afraid of the dark? It's okay, because I still am. Funny story, literally just a couple months ago, my wife and I moved into our new home, and in the middle of the night, an alarm went off. Now, this is a new house. I'm not familiar with it. I can't find the light switches. It's just pandemonium. I don't know if this is a robber, if this is a false alarm, if this is a rainstorm gone awry, what? And when you're woken up out of a deep sleep by just some jolt of a sound, your mind tends to go crazy places. Like, do I need to fashion a weapon out of anything within reasonable reaching distance here? Because this might be for real. And it's funny, even as an adult, in retrospect, when you know everything's okay, right? Going back and playing over the just kind of weird thoughts that hit your mind. Oh my gosh, what if this is a robber? What if this is like the movies and I'm going to have to do some jujitsu or some kung fu? Or what if I have to fashion a weapon and stab someone, or yell and scream and chase them off? Or what if it's an animal, or this, the other thing? And it's not that difficult to understand why kids, myself included, are terrified of the dark. The unknown aspect of being in the dark lends to just your mind to tell stories based on whatever frame of reference that you have, right? So kids that watch cartoons, yeah, it makes sense why a boogie monster might be in the closet or a monster under the bed. And when you don't have the proper information, what ends up happening is you lean towards stories that you yourself tell, and then you make real decisions on them. So what happened exactly in the Naris household that night? Well, it turned out that my wife had bought a new alarm clock for the new guest room, and my 2-year-old smashed the cool looking button on it, and at midnight the alarm went off. How did I figure all that out? Well, it turns out my smartphone has a flashlight on it. And all I had to do was turn on the flashlight, go towards the sound, and all of a sudden, problem solved. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ryan Norris. I was invited to the 2021 Rent Manager Conference, where I got to discuss key performance indicators that I use for my business within the mobile home park space. And everything that I said during this presentation revolves around one thing: assumptions. You see, we make decisions based on assumptions. Why? Because most of the world that we operate in, the business world, is based on uncertainty. It's more mathematical statistics than mathematical calculus, right? 2 + 2 = 4, or 2 + X probably equals 4. Well, it turns out that we actually tell ourselves a lot of stories based off of a lot of really weird assumptions. Those assumptions are actually very based in emotions. For example, me freaking out in the middle of the night. By the way, imagine me trying to go back to sleep after my heart was going a million miles an hour. It basically didn't happen. And thinking back on all those crazy stories I told myself in those moments before I shined the flashlight on the alarm clock, boy, I could have done a lot of really stupid things. I could have destroyed a lot of things in complete error. And worse, I could have justified it by saying, well, I was going to do anything to protect my wife and child. The truth of the matter is, it all comes down to one apparatus that I had at my fingertips: the flashlight. Today, I am going to explain why Rent Manager can be your business flashlight. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Ryan Naris. If this is the first time you're tuning in to any of my content, I am the co-founder of Archimedes Group. As of this recording in late 2021, I have closed on, been a part of 27 mobile home parks spanning just shy of 2,000 pads. I'm a double graduate of Wake Forest University. I went as a psychology statistics undergrad and master's in business administration MBA grad. I'm the host of this podcast you're listening to, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life. If you are tuning into YouTube, you can see all of this wonderful presentation. If you are currently tuning in to the podcast, don't worry. I am going to do the best that I can to explain everything here, all using my voice. So the first KPI I want to discuss is collections. So for those tuning in for the first time that don't know my backstory, I had no money, no network, and no experience in July of 2015 when I started my mobile home park business. I moved into a mobile home and lived there for the better part of 18 months, paid myself the property manager salary and served as my own property manager and learned from the front lines. I applied all the wonderful things I learned in my MBA to this business. And because of that, I was able to strip the feelings out of and weird stories and assumptions out of business decision making and made really good business decisions so I could run profitable businesses where the tenants are happy, they pay, and we reinvest in the property and everybody wins. And if you are not a consistent listener of my podcast, then let me catch you up to speed. This is a debt collections business. So it should be no surprise to you that the first bit of key performance indicator that we are going to cover today quite literally is collections, because this is a collections business. So I am going to show you actual reports that I use within Rent Manager that you can basically just copy and paste yourself. If you use Rent Manager or if you use something else, you can take the gist. You could do all these same reports within Microsoft Excel or Sheets or whatever. Just know Rent Manager, boy, it makes things easy and it automates them. So first and foremost, delinquency by the dollar. So in other words, what did you charge a resident versus what did they pay? So it turns out, as nice of a description as this can be, there's a lot of cons with it. Let me give you, for example, let's say your rent roll is $20,000 and you sell a home for $20,000. Do you have perfect collections that month if literally no one else pays? That's not really fair, right? So you can't actually look at total charge versus total collected just on the rent roll. You have to look at all the charges: late fees, water fees, home sales, rent payments, whatever. This summary rent roll allows you, the business owner, to get a more detailed, more granular idea of what's going on. For example, is it fair if someone paid for 6 months in advance in 1 month to count 5 more rent payments for that month, or should you strip that out? My vote, you strip that out. Next month, you reflect it as collected just for that 1 month, even though the money didn't hit the bank account that month. These are bits of data that Rent Manager or whatever software you're using can and should be able to parse out for you if properly programmed. Prior balances. That also makes a big difference. If someone is multiple months behind and they paid you just for this month, is that a fair thing to say? Hey, we're at 100% collected this month. Someone is 3 months back, but they paid for this month. These are things that you need to really understand. So in other words, it's not as crisp and clear and easy as 100% collected or not 100% collected. Also, it's not very deterministic. And what I mean by that is a lot of times someone will partially pay. And I don't just mean they owe you $500 and they give you 250. I mean, they owe you $500 and they give you 750. So in other words, what carries over to next month? Well, credit for 250. That's not 2 months. That's a month and a half, right? So in other words, it's not a quick and easy 1 out of 10 people didn't pay. So that's a 90% collections rate. If that one person partially paid last month and then didn't pay this month, then you're in a weird way, 95% collected, right? That's a story that you need to really understand because, again, at the end of the day, money in versus money out, it just doesn't tell you the whole picture. You need to look at credits. You need to look at prior balances. You need to look at all of that. Who paid, how they paid, what they paid for. These are all incredibly relevant things. Now, I also don't like to look at collections from one perspective. I also like to do it by the late payer. In other words, what I do within my rent manager is I have a delinquency report set up to filter out anyone who owes me less than $100. So in other words, if someone, for whatever reason, paid me $5 shy of their total rent amount, while technically a partial payment, I generally speaking take it if it's going to leave the overall balance less than $100. In other words, this will give you a nice, crisp, deterministic, easy way to do the math. One person out of 10 didn't pay the full rent amount, therefore you are 90% collected. What this does for you as well, by the way, is it consolidates multi-month delinquent residents into just one report. So in other words, someone may have paid you for this month, but they have a big balance. That person is still really delinquent, and you really do have, not on a cash basis, but on more of a delinquency report basis, someone who's late on their rent, and that should be counted in a crisp, clean way. You have 10 residents, one has a balance, the other 9 don't. You are 90% collected, whether or not the money hit. Now, it's up to you how you want to report this, to whom and how you're going to slice and dice it. But at the end of the day, you need to be looking at this because a lot of different stories can be told with very basic, cut and dry binary reporting. This adds a couple layers of potential complexity to what you're doing, which can tell very, very different pictures. Cool thing about this report here, you can adjust it to whatever you want. You can adjust it down to $1. You can adjust it down to $0. I like $100. I think that's pretty fair. And again, it's going to allow you to better adjust for multi-month late payers who maybe took a good big chunk out of it this month, maybe paid over what they owed for you this month. If they're 3 months behind, they paid a month and a half this month. Should that count on a dollar basis? Probably not, but it might. And maybe you ought to be doing that. Conclusion, use both. Turns out the more data you have, the more way you can tell stories and really understand what's going on, the better you can address things. Because at the end of the day, an eviction is absolutely devastating. I absolutely hate evicting people. I don't want to do it. That being said, at a certain point in time, there does come a time where a threshold, where a line is crossed, and you got to do what you got to do to run a business. So also, the more times you give handouts to folks, the more complex your business gets, the harder it gets to really scale. So in other words, while no pay, no stay, I personally disagree with. Also, being overly generous and having a bunch of side deals with this person, that person, the other, it can get way too much if you want to get bigger. That being said, I have a heart, and sometimes that can be at odds with being a good business person. That's a story for another day. Financial metrics. Obviously, we need to know if we're profitable or not, but not just are we profitable, what the heck is going on? So here is a very old, by very old, I mean a couple years, juxtaposition, if you will, of each month in the year 2020 for me, for one of my properties. Now, as you can see here towards the right of the screen, and for those listening in on the podcast, I'm going to describe what's going on. I have coded through the chart of accounts in my rent manager a bunch of different ways people can pay me. In other words, if you give me $500, does that all go towards gross revenue and that's that? Or was some of that a late fee? Some of that an app fee? Do you have park-owned homes? Do you have lot rents? Do you have RVs? Did you have non-sufficient funds fee because someone's check bounced? Do you have rent-to-owns? Rent-to-owns are legal or illegal per Dodd-Frank, per whatever state you are in and operating. But several states of mine, there are ways that you can sell or carry a mobile home towards someone. Call it a lease option, a rent-to-own, whatever you want, as long as your attorney gives you the thumbs up that you can sell or carry X, Y, or Z way, as long as you have the proper license. A rent-to-own can be a great thing. Now, in some states, you can't do rent-to-owns. In others, you can. In some states, you have to do what's called a lease with option to purchase. In some states, they'll basically call that a disguised sale. There's a bunch of different ways your attorney can draft up essentially the same thing, but the truth is, banks don't like loaning on mobile homes. And it's a really terrible thing what the Dodd-Frank does to folks who, for all intents and purposes, can and should be mobile home owners. And it's my duty as a mobile home park owner to operate within the laws that of the states that I participate in, how to help good people be homeowners. That's simple. So again, I've not passed the bar. I've taken like one legal course in my life. I strongly recommend you talk to an attorney who knows what they're doing, who's ready to fight for you in court if things go sideways, and to do things, try your best to be generous to your residents, because a lot of folks would be wonderful homeowners and banks just won't lend on these. So long story short, because there's a lot of gray area, it varies by state, I just call rent to own, lease option, whatever, additional rent. So in other words, this part of the income statement can be uniform across all my properties in all my different states. So in other words, as you can see here, I will describe to those listening in, I have lot rent, park-owned home rent, additional rent, application fees, non-sufficient funds fees, late fees, and I also have in my general chart of accounts RV fees. So in other words, I don't count RV lot rent the same as rent. In other words, what does this do for you? Well, it breaks down your income by category. So then you can see how you're doing month over month. So right here, you can see in January 2020, our gross revenue was $25,055. And in February of 2020 for this property, it was $24,860. Should we press the alarm button? What the heck's going on here? Why did revenue go down? Well, because we aren't just saying how much money was deposited. We can zoom in on this and find out that, well, in February, we collected less late fees. People paid on time. Lot rent, park on home rent, additional rent, those numbers all stayed identical, but people paid a little faster in February. That's a really good story to tell, because if you keep historical data, you can answer questions like, well, do people pay worse during the holidays? So I have a lot of friends, or at least friends that used to be in the business, who swore up and down that at Christmas time, people paid worse. In 27 mobile home parks, with a mountain of data into wonderfully, at times, seemingly useless degrees in statistics, let me tell you something. I have looked at my own data a bunch of different ways. I have found no statistical correlation between Christmas and people's ability to pay. The data it's just not there. In fact, there's actually historically better collections for me in December relative to other months. I have not experienced in mobile home parks any seasonality or any reason to believe that Christmas time or tax time or this, that, or the other collects better or worse than any other months. Now, funny story, I used to work in the car industry. There was a lot of seasonality within purchases of cars, and the data showed it, and it was pretty darn convincing. Here, it's effectively the same. There is no statistical correlation that I could find. What you're kind of catching, hopefully, is that instead of telling myself a story, I took real data, I data mined it, and I actually figured something out with that data so I could make a better business decision. For example, I'm not going to increase my late fees during December with the understanding that collections are going to be worse, so I better be an extra hard hard on these residents during a Christmas time where they're probably not going to pay me. No, I'm going to be fair, and I'm going to let the data make the decision be a no-brainer. So in other words, you can track and analyze seasonality. You can track things like turnaround projects. So in the next slide, I'm going to discuss a turnaround project. So then that way I can look at how I can better underwrite future turnaround projects. So as you can see here, and again, don't worry if you're listening in, I'm going to explain it. This is a 12-month recap for year over year. So this was a community that we purchased in 2018, and what we are comparing right now is 2018 versus 2019's performance. So 2019 and 2020, if you will, 2018 and 2019, if you will. So it's kind of a 2-year juxtaposition side by side. So long story short, what you can see here, and I'll read this out, is that when we purchased the property, our lot rent was about $354,000 and our park-owned home rent was about $39,000. The next year, that lot rent jumped up to just shy of $413,000 and the park-owned home rent dropped to shy of $16,000. What is this telling us here? Well, what this is telling us is that I was selling off park-owned homes to good people, because also you'll see or hear that my rent-to-own lease option additional rent, if you will, for said property was just shy of $55,000 in the turnaround year and was just shy of $114,000 the subsequent year post turnaround. In other words, I swapped park-owned home income for rent-to-home income. And this property, by the way, right now, almost all those rent-to-owns are done. We've retained nearly every single one of them. Those folks are incredibly happy to have gotten a wonderful deal, below market deal, the most of them, on their homes themselves. I do not charge interest. These are straight rental units until they own them. And it is a wonderful situation for everyone involved. Why? Because in my space, it turns out approximately a third of the profits or revenue above what lot rent is go towards maintaining the home. What I found is that 33% to 50% of monies collected above lot rent for a park-owned home rental typically account for the amount of maintenance a home will have. For example, if I have $500 lot rent and I charge $1,000 for a rental, then I could safely assume roughly, what is that? $125 max, which is, call it $250 max, which is half of $500. So the delta between the lot rent and the park-owned home rent, so $500 and $1,000, that leaves $500 additional dollars made per month per park-owned home unit. And half of that is $250, and a third of that is, not good at mental math, less. Upper hundreds, if you will, around $200. So let's say, just for ease sake, we're spending $200 to $250 a month maintaining a home. You're not going to have a re-roof every year. You're not going to have to replace HVACs every year. However, it's you're going to have things that break. It just happens. It's going to be a lot more difficult to really predict when things will break. Some residents are rougher on homes than others, but let's say $170 to $250 in that hypothetical situation a month will go towards the park-owned home unit. Well, to me, while that is more money, that is also more folks I'm going to have to employ, more maintenance folks, more materials I'm going to have to buy. It's going to include more overhead. It's going to be a lot more phone calls. It's going to be a pain in the butt. I have also seen in my own data, it is a lot more profitable. Seriously, it's higher risk, it's higher variability, but it's also higher reward. Me, personally, I would rather make someone a homeowner. So I would rather deal with someone who takes, in theory, a little more pride in the community, but also it's just easier to scale when you're not having to constantly fix things that are breaking. And if you can find someone who's, for example, a construction worker or a handy person themselves, they can buy these homes and be their own labor. And it is a wonderful situation for individuals who can now have a yard and a roof and a home they can call their own, even though they don't own the dirt. They don't have to share a wall with a neighbor. They are paying a fraction of what a comparable, call it maybe C or B class apartment complex would charge. So it'd be a whole lot less expensive for them to live in similar space, sometimes more bedrooms, sometimes more space, and a yard. It's a really good deal for a lot of folks for a lot of reasons. So these are stories that you can now tell based on actual data. So you're not saying, well, collections are worse during Christmas time. And to be fair about that, I've actually heard a lot of counties shut down for the entire month of December for evictions. So COVID or no COVID, you cannot evict people in December, and people know that and take advantage of it. So to be fair, at least my data suggests that there is no seasonality within rent payments in the mobile home park space. That being said, I also don't have data from other counties where there may or may not be restrictions towards evictions that could skew the data. Again, what you want to do is flash the light on the dark uncertainty so you can now tell better, more accurate stories. Data will drive your decisions, not stories based on emotions. So just to kind of recap here, with a report like this, with a great juxtaposition, you can see all sorts of cool graphs that tell stories. So for example, for those who can't see, in December of 2020, my expenses skyrocketed and my net income plummeted. Why did it just happen for that month when the other months were relatively stable? Well, it turns out in this county, what they have you do is they have you pay the mobile home tax for your residents and then allow you to bill them back. Now, you can't charge a profit on that. You can charge late fees, but you cannot charge a profit. And so what you'll see is over in January, the flip happens. So you'll start making a little bit more income. Expenses are still a little bit high because I'm still paying some of those in January. But eventually what happens is, on the whole, your income, or at least here, the income is rather flat. Your expenses have a little bit of bumps. But what this will do is allow you, again, not to tell stories. At the end of the day, though, for visual people, Rent Manager allows a lot of cool graphs, and the data itself can help you predict your cash flows a lot better throughout the year when big expenses like tax bills for all the mobile homes are going to hit, and when you can start charging those back. All of that's going to be very obvious in some cases, if you would like, in visual ways, as you can see here with cool charts and graphs. But at the end of the day, the data is going to speak for itself, so you can make those decisions based on real data and not stories. You can also break it down by unit. So right here, I have a single family home. Now, when I got started in the real estate space, I started with single family homes. Turns out I was not very good at them. And this data is a little bit biased, but it tells a great story. Again, that's the theme of today, is let's get good data so we can tell good stories. This is a house right here where I had to do a complete re-roof on in the year 2020. So as you can see at the bottom, I lost $236.24 in all of 2020. Now, this resident is wonderful. This is one of my favorite residents. I know her by first name and last name, and think they're great. And I hope they don't leave this home. That being said, I lost money on this home. Now, by the way, this does not include, I've stripped out overhead and things like insurance and taxes and employee costs and other admin costs. I don't spread that out in these reports here. You can. I don't get that granular with it. Rather, what I would like to do with these reports right here, as I'm basically creating a juxtaposition between 2020 and 2021, is I want to show a story, which is I spent $7,436.24 in what I call park-owned home maintenance. Now, this is a single-family home. Arguably, I should say single-family home maintenance, but it's just quicker and easier for me to keep it as park-owned home because it functions very similar to one. and my gross revenue for the year was $7,200. Obviously, that's a loss. And really, on a cash on cash basis, on a straight cash basis, it's a lot more than that because I have other overhead I have to pay for. That hurts. Now, compare that with just January through August of the subsequent year, this year, as of this recording, 2021, where $5,500 basically has come in, and the park owned home maintenance is $295. So it's not even $300. Therefore, the profitability before overhead is like $5,200. 2/3 of the way through the year. Why? I didn't have to replace a roof. So it turns out this is great data for you to make a decision as to what do you want to own? Because from my perspective, I really don't want to be in the business of having unstable cash flows. I would rather know what can go wrong, what it's going to cost, how frequently I got to worry about it. And hopefully I stabilize out everything, right? You know, there's always going to be good times and bad times, but when you have a comparison of good times and bad times where it's quite literally thousands upon thousands of dollars, and by the way, by the end of 2021, this will be close to $10,000 in profit for this year. And for 2020, probably with all overhead included, I'm sub $1,000. So in other words, you have a plus or minus $10,000 delta between a bad year and a good year. That's a lot for one unit. So what's appealing about MySpace is, MySpace being mobile home parks, is what about just the tenant-owned home where I own the dirt, I maintain and pay all the infrastructure and pay all the taxes, and if a toilet breaks, that's on the resident. If a roof caves in, that's on the resident. What does this look like in comparison to a single-family home that I own? Well, for those who can see, we have $4,200 worth of gross revenue in all of 2020. And all that we had to pay for was the water and sewer, because they pay their own electrical and they pay for all home fixes, yada, yada, yada. So my profitability is basically what I collected. That's about it. Again, I'm stripping out overhead. So in other words, you could assume that the overhead is identical for both this tenant-owned home as well as the single-family home. So for all intents and purposes, those two are equal. Now compare the bad year to the good year from the single-family home, and remember, without overhead, that's like 200 and change bucks in the red. So in other words, going back to the previous slide where it's over a $5,000 profit in the green, 2/3 of the way through the season, versus going negative, probably overhead included, plus or minus $1,000. Compare that to an entire year of a tenant-owned home. Yeah, it's not going to be as profitable in good times to not own the home. To own a single family home or a park-owned home will pay you more profit. But because you don't have to worry about roofs and HVACs and windows and doors and yada, 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 you sacrifice a reward for more stable cash flows. What you can now do with this information is you can now make very well-informed decisions. You can now place a risk-reward profile on potential acquisitions. You can improve your decision-making by zooming in on an income statement, quite literally by unit. This is pretty powerful stuff. Again, the business that we are in with this data is to remove the feelings, remove the ridiculous assumptions that you are making without realizing you're making them, because we're human beings. And at the end of the day, when you experience something, it generally speaking goes to your amygdala before it goes to your prefrontal cortex. What does that mean? Well, we think that the amygdala is responsible for emotions, and we think that higher rationality comes from the prefrontal cortex. In other words, it doesn't matter if you see it, if you taste it, if you experience it, whatever that it is, that stimulus is, you will react emotionally before you have a chance to add reason. And we human beings are really good at adding reason to feelings and pretending like we are being rational, because we also have things called egos, and we don't like being wrong. We don't like being called stupid. We like to be able to save face. And it is a serious burden on businesses when you don't have good data, because people think they're crushing it. They're LeBron James, basically, of whatever field they're in, when they aren't. When they're most likely pretty darn normal and very emotional. Well, data allows you to really shine a flashlight on whatever's going on, so you can make better business decisions and not be a victim of your own emotionality. Next KPI is going to be unit tracking. This is incredibly important and really cool what you can do within Rent Manager. So here's a report called Unit Availability Listing. For those who are listening in, let me explain what a unit availability listing report will detail out. It's going to detail out your lot type, when someone moved out, how many days it's available, things like market rent, and also you can leave in notes. So for example, in my space, you're always going to have at some point in time a vacant mobile home lot. You can't just fit any old home in there. Why? You'll have things like setback laws from your local government. You'll have things like weird topography or septic tanks in odd locations. So in other words, can you fit your mobile home parallel or perpendicular to the road, or both? How big of a mobile home can you put in there? Well, it turns out you can go and measure all that stuff and drop it in the notes of the unit itself. So if you're on vacation and someone else is ordering a home or installing a home or doing X, Y, and Z on your behalf, guess what? It's all in the notes right there. Also, weird things happen. For example, someone somehow moves into a lot and tells the mail people it's a different address. I literally had that happen before at one of my properties. There's a difference between like 173 and 245. So it wasn't even really particularly close. And when I went to the zoning department, the woman like pleaded with me, please, when this person moves out of this unit, move the next person in at 245, not 173. And sure enough, I put in little notes for that unit, changed it all in the system. So as soon as that person moved out, boom, it was done. And the next person moved in with the correct address. So you can drop in all sorts of cool stuff like that. And again, like I said before, with income, the income statement, you can change the name of your units themselves. So in this report right here, we have 2 vacant units. One is an RV and one is a park-owned home. Now, I have notes on the RV used for office and employee lodging. Well, no wonder why it's in air quotes vacant unit, because we're using it as an office. Now, depending on how you file your taxes, you can do things like lease your own office to yourself. For this property, we don't do that for various tax reasons, but you can do really cool, fun stuff like that if you have a good CPA who can walk you through what you can and can't do. Strongly recommend that. Same thing with the good attorney. But Rent Manager or whatever system you're using can help you do this. You got to track that data so you can make really good decisions. Here's another really great point. As you can see right here, I said $5,000 max to make move-in ready. Ryan, 7/15/21. So in July, I walked this home and I deemed a $5,000 expenditure would get this move-in ready. Well, that $5,000 to me is overkill. In other words, there's a huge market of mobile homes from construction workers who love to buy something that needs a little TLC, and they'll buy it at a slight discount and pay you a fair market rent if they can just have the home, air quotes, handyman special, if you will. $5,000 is not a whole lot of money. And for those who can see this home had been sitting for 123 days when I made this report. Now, what I can do is go, all right, is there something wrong with my marketing? Are there not a lot of construction folks in the area who want to take on a project? Why has this been sitting vacant for 123 days? Spoiler alert, I ended up rehabbing this home for $5,000 and I sold it pretty promptly. Why? Because it turns out the market at the time just didn't want any projects. They wanted to move in and have things ready to go. I have a wonderful family in that unit right now, by the way. They wanted something move-in ready. I ponied up the money. Those decisions were made based on this report. What do I got to do to make it move-in ready? How long has it been vacant? What are my potential opportunity costs? Rehab estimates, address changes, lot dimensions, all sorts of that stuff. All of that can be done with this one wonderful report. Again, as long as you're using it. So you garbage in, garbage out, right? You got to put in the notes in there. But again, you can make great business decisions based on the notes that you take and the data that Rent Manager can track for you. This one is going to be really hard to describe to those of you who are listening in. This is what's called a unit status chart. Now, this is purely a visual report. So apologies for those of you tuning in. I will do my best to describe it. Basically, in the mobile home park space, a mobile home lot will go through a couple different phases. First and obvious is you have a mobile home on the lot with someone living in it, and all the lights and water and sewer are all on. Everything is good to go. You have a bona fide an edifice that is livable and a resident that is paying you. Well, let's go backwards, okay? What happens before that? Well, you have a livable edifice with no one in it. So in other words, you have infrastructure, a mobile home, all the connections and everything work, just no resident. Well, what's one before that? Well, you have a plot of land with a mobile home on it that is not ready to go. What happens before that? You have a plot of land with all the infrastructure and no home. And then one before that, you have a plot of land that is zoned, it's legal, all that jazz, no infrastructure. In other words, sometimes you're going to need to go build out infrastructure. You're going to need to go find, source, and bring in new homes. You're going to have a period of time where you'll have to deck, skirt, electric work, light rehab work, water, sewer, the works. You're going to have stuff to do and a period of time where you have a mobile home that is not livable yet. Then you'll have a mobile home that's livable, but no one in it. And then eventually you have a unit. This report here, the unit status chart, makes that visual. So for those of you who are listening in and not viewing on YouTube, what you basically see here are a bunch of lines with a bunch of different colors that change colors throughout a continuous plot of time, which gives a visual representation to how long something was vacant for various reasons. So again, was there infrastructure? Yes or no? Was there a home there? Yes or no? Was the home livable? Yes or no? Was there someone there paying rent? Yes or no? All that jazz with colors in a chart. It's wonderful. If you're a visual person like me, boy, does this look great. And it gets really exciting when everything is green, because that means everything is being used and people are paying rent, but also it gives you a visual representation as to how long it really took to build out the infrastructure and move people in. And spoiler alert, boy, do I hate that. It is very capital and time consuming. And it's, to me, more fun to buy the next community and make it better than to have to worry about bringing in new homes. That being said, boy, there's a lot of people who do an incredible job of bringing in homes into my space. There are, my space being mobile home parks, there are a lot of different ways that you can be successful in the mobile home park space and make it better. So I'm not going to say my way is better. I'm just saying I prefer my business model for me and for what my goals are. The next report here is the unit type listing. This breaks down by unit type, occupancy, count, the works. So in other words, for those who can see, I have vacant lot, unusable vacant lot. What I mean by that is maybe you have the zoning for it, but based on setback rules or spacing or this, that, or the other thing, you can't use it. That's a good thing to track. You're zoned for 100 units, but you can actually only use 80 lots. You don't want to forget about those 20 lots because in the future, legislation might change, X, Y, and Z may change, and you are zoned for another 20 lots. So you should track those. That being said, it should not affect your occupancy because it's unusable, right? So you have them. If someone pulls a report, hey, wait a minute, you have 80 units and the zoning report says you have 100. Well, 20 of those are unusable vacant lots. Tenant-owned homes, single-family homes, recreation vehicles, rent-to-own, park-owned home, You'll also see garage and mentorship program slot. So it turns out I actually use my rent manager to track my mentees in my mentorship program. So the fun part about Rent Manager is it can actually be used for a whole lot of other businesses. So when I went to the Rent Manager conference a couple weeks ago, I learned that salons use Rent Manager, marinas use Rent Manager, bowling alleys, prisons use Rent Manager. Why? Well, prisons actually are kind of a little obvious. People are moving in and out. Salons make sense because a lot of salons don't actually employ the mani-pedi hairstylist, beauty person. They actually rent the space within the salon from the salon itself. So in other words, you have people moving in and out. Interesting stuff. So you can actually use Rent Manager for a lot of other non-rental related businesses, which I find interesting. But if I ever want to say, man, I'm buying a lot of park-owned home, I have a lot of park-owned home exposure, I want to make that all tenant-owned homes, how can I pull a quick report to say, man, I've got a lot of park-owned homes, or I've got X% of park-owned homes, or X% of rent-owns. Boom, all right here. Gives you a count, gives you a vacancy, gives you all of that. You can do some quick math and you can have some quick answers, and you can automate these reports too, which we're going to talk about next. Next KPI, if you will, is auto-generated reporting. So though that itself is not a KPI, you can send out all KPIs automatically within Rent Manager. Regardless if you use Rent Manager or not, you need to be doing this. It is got to be one of the coolest things that we do. So we partner with Avid Exchange as well as Paylease and Zego. So we have a tremendous amount of our accounts payable and our accounts receivable completely automated. What does that mean? Yeah, you got to swoop in with some journal entries here or there, but for the most part, we have for years reconciled all of our books for the prior month on the first of the month. What I do with auto-generated reporting here is on the 15th of the month, just to give myself 2 weeks to make sure all my books are good, I will send out all these reports that you can see here. If you can't see, I'm going to read it out to all relevant people. So this report that I have clicked on right here is unit type listing. So again, people can say, how many park-owned homes do we have? How many tenant-owned homes? How many RVs? Yada, yada, yada. 12-month recap, which we did earlier. Profit and loss for prior month. Just how do we do last month? Balance sheet. So you can see all liabilities and assets and distributions and contributions. Rent roll and recurring charges, all on there. This goes to all appropriate people, right? On the 15th, automatically, I don't have to do anything. 6 a.m. on the 15th, it's sitting in everybody that needs to get these reports in their inbox. I can be on vacation. I could be doing whatever I'm doing, and I can count on the fact that as long as my data is clean, by 6 a.m. on the 15th of every month, this is going to be in everybody's inbox. Beautiful, beautiful. Now you can also parse out other things like CapEx. So for example, if I redo a well house, which I'm actually doing today, that probably shouldn't go under net ordinary income. That should probably be below the line. That should not count against that, because I'm not going to redo a well house every single year. I'm going to do it maybe once a decade, maybe. So that's probably something an investor would like to know. Just, hey, there's a profit and loss here, but there's other expenses below the line. What the heck is that? Great. You can include a CapEx for X amount of time, X period of time in these reports too, which is great. So again, you can send this to business partners, investors, and employees. Employees may not need to see the balance sheet, but you may want them to see the profit and loss statement. You definitely want them to see the unit type listing so they know what's available and what's not. Getting a little bit further into this, you can do this property specific. You can do this by groups of properties. You can do this by however which way you want to slice and dice it. So only the relevant people get what they need. You can add things like violations to this. So with the Rent Manager app, you can take pictures and create violations within the app. So if you go and there's an illegal trampoline, you can take a picture of it. You can create the violation. Boom, it's in your violation report. And my company, what we do on the 6th, at 6 a.m. of every Wednesday, every property manager gets a report of all the violations that they have. And when they log into their rent manager, if they want to see a picture of it, they can. And guess what? They can even email or text the picture of the trampoline or whatever violation to the resident. So they know, hey, you don't resolve this within 24 to 48 hours, you're getting a fine. This all happens automatically. You can trust but verify that your employees are doing their jobs. So when you do your property drive-through, if you see something, you can create a violation, you can take a photo, and it can be all. So when you jump on the phone with them, you're like, hey, I saw this trampoline there. Yep. Hey, we got it, boss. Don't worry about it. Great. What I do when I go visit my properties, by the way, is I have a printout of all violations and I just see what's missing. And I tell my employees, I don't care that there's a lot of violations. I care when violations aren't in this violations report. I'm not going to tell you when I'm going to show up to the property. I am going to tell you when I show up to the property and violations are not on there. Don't need you to be perfect. Don't expect it. I want to see you're trying, and I want to trust but verify. So these are just kind of cool things you can send specifically just to an employee or an investor or whomever. Obviously, employees will get stuff like unit availability, obviously violations, delinquency, stuff like that you can include and completely automate so you can take your mind off of working in your business and focus back on working on your business because you know things are just kind of working without you being there. Miscellaneous. There's a lot of miscellaneous stuff I want to go over. I mentioned earlier rent to own, lease option, whatever. Again, want to reiterate this. It is a really weird gray area. Get a really good attorney and don't assume that because you do business in one state, it's the same in another. You need to have a good attorney per state who really knows and understands it and is comfortable with not only the law, but also defending you and whatever lease you have in court. It can happen. It will happen. I have people I know that have fought and lost. It happens. It's really sad how there's one bad guy out of 100, but that one bad guy out of 100 ruins it for everybody else. Do your homework, folks. Don't be afraid to spend money hiring the right people to get stuff right. That being said, Rent Manager can help you track stuff like that. So if you have X number of payments before the home is air quotes paid off, however you do your seller carry, as you can see right here, there's a loan listing report. So it lets you know how many people at property or your whole portfolio or your group of properties, how much they've paid, how much they owe, what their payment is. As you can see, it's all zeros in terms of interest rate. I do not charge interest. And yeah, it's all there. Origination date, maturity date, original principal, payment due, principal balance, the works. It's all automated too with all of my auto-generated reporting stuff. So you can see the relevant data, you can track history, you can do all of this, and even within the tenant profile itself. So in other words, if one of my property managers goes, oh man, this person just got their tax return, they want to pay off the home now, how much do they owe? Well, they don't need to call me or text me. Why? Because this shows up on their recurring charges tab. Brilliant. You can also change it so that it doesn't show up on the balance sheet, because technically in some states, depending on how you file your taxes, if this was a bona fide home sale, you are supposed to create a sale, if you will, for your profit and loss statement, meaning you have now a notes receivable on your balance sheet. Guess what? If I just confused you, Rent Manager will literally do that for you. If this is a bona fide rent with option to purchase, and you basically are either paying rent until you decide to buy the home after X amount of months, or you just continue to rent it, well, that probably shouldn't show up on the profit and loss statement as a home sale, because you don't know when it's a home sale or it's not. And it shouldn't show up as a note receivable because it's technically not a note receivable. It is a rental. Therefore, Rent Manager can do that for you. It is literally the click of a button. You just click off, make this a sale or something like that. There is a way to have it not report to the balance sheet and just remain basically just something that tracks the rental itself on the side. Wicked cool stuff, and will make your life really easy if you end up doing a handful or a lot of these. The dashboard. The dashboard is wicked cool. So to me, coming from corporate America, I did not enjoy it. And I will reiterate why I did not enjoy it. It's because when you don't have clear quantifiable performance metrics, basically everybody thinks they're LeBron James. In other words, when I sold cars back in the car industry, you either sold 20 cars or you sold 10 cars or you sold 15 cars. Guess what? There was a number of performance that you did. So that way, if I sold 20 and then the guy over there sold 10, he's not going to look at me and go, I'm better than him because of my output. He's going to go, maybe I'm better than him for subjective reasons, but in terms of total volume, it's really clear. 20 is bigger than 10. Now, the flip of that is in corporate America where job roles are fuzzy and there's not exactly a way to measure how good of a job you're doing or what you're doing. Then what I've seen in my short time in corporate America is that everybody looks at you and goes, I'm better than this person. I'm the next CEO. I am the next LeBron James. Whether they are or are not is not relevant. Why? Because they have no way to measure it. This dashboard is like a scoreboard at the car dealership or in a sporting event where my employees, anyone who works for myself included, can look at this and be humbled or be excited. So this right here has tasks, so you can track projects in Rent Manager, the delinquency list, and the vacancy list. If this is a big, long delinquency list, I know I'm not doing so great. This is a big, long delinquency list, same story. You can also swap this out with a whole bunch of other things. So for my employees, they have violations, delinquency, vacancy. I usually leave tasks off because I like to track those for myself and follow up with my employees. That could be different for your business. To me, I want a clean property. I want a property that's full, and I want a property of folks who are paying. Those are the most important things in my line of work. Maybe project management is important for your property managers. Maybe not. You get to pick that. But all of this gets better when you have a scoreboard where every day when your employees log into their Rent Manager, boom, there's the scoreboard. Are you winning? Or are you losing? Are you average? Are you below average? Are you way above average? Guess what? You can think you're awesome, but now you have data to either say, yes, you're awesome, no, you're not, or you are normal as pumpkin pie. This allows people to tell less stories, because we're all going to tell stories, be a little bit less emotional, because we're all emotional, and make decisions based on reality and data, not on weird stories that you tell when it's in the middle of the night and you don't realize your wife put a new alarm clock and your son pressed a cool looking button and now you're terrified and your heart is racing a million miles an hour. We used to joke, by the way, that those people who thought they were LeBron James were crushing it. And we would tell that joke all the time. We'd be like, this guy's crushing it. And what that meant was this person, for better or worse, thinks they are just hot stuff. And whether they are or not is not really relevant because they're crushing it, if you get my gist. Boy, I hated that. Boy, I don't want my employees or coworkers or business investors or anybody to be anything but data driven. At least they're going to create delusions and tell weird stories. At least they can have some humble pie when they open up their Rent Manager or their email. So this is all doable within Rent Manager. Again, don't want to say anything good or bad about other platforms. Just want to say whether you're using Rent Manager as your flashlight, your business flashlight, or whatever you're using as your business flashlight, fight assumptions. Fight the weird stories that we all tell because we're emotional humans. At the end of the day, fight those with data and reality, and you'll make a lot better decisions. To end off, obviously we're on something that's been pre-recorded, so you can't ask live questions. But the good news is I had 45 minutes worth of questions after this presentation at the Rent Manager conference, and I stayed the entire 45 minutes and had more questions after that, after hours. So I have what I recall being the most relevant questions. So I want to hit a couple of those while we have a couple minutes at the end here. So first and foremost, how do you manage RV parks within Rent Manager? I thought this was a great question, and my answer is very similarly. So Rent Manager actually just came out with a short-term rental platform within Rent Manager itself. Now, I have RV exposure, but it's very light and it's all long-term. Now, what I'm able to do and what I think I would do if I had shorter term rentals is the same thing I do with my longer term rentals. What I would do is have it all on ePay. so ePay, cash pay. I would have e-sign documents. I would have all of my background checks doable before they even show up. You can even create user-defined fields within a rent manager. So prospects you can even drop in information on their RV itself. And it's really relevant, by the way, if you're in the RV space, to know how much space that you have. Some of these RVs are colossal and won't fit into this space. That's really good for notes in your unit section. So the newly released short-term rental feature should be fantastic, though again, I don't do it. I do more longer term stuff, and it is seamless. It is just like having any other type of rental that I have. Selling off park-owned homes. What are my wins, struggles, etc.? I did an entire podcast episode on this, and then I've done several interviews on this. Check my website out, archimedesgrp.com. It's in the show notes below. I got to tell you, it's a high risk, high reward type thing. You need to get licensed. You need to follow the state's laws. You need to report the taxes. You need to pay the taxes for the sale of said home, and then ongoing property taxes for that home, potentially based on where you're at. It's not as easy as you think. I will say this though, when you look at my delinquency report, it's almost a clear 50-50. 50% of the delinquency in the 27 mobile home park deals I've done, it's about 50-50. 50% are original people and 50% are people I brought in. I have brought in an enormous amount more people than I inherited. But the delinquency report is 50-50. What does that mean? What that means is the original folks in the properties, at least that I have bought, tend to be the worst performers. So when it comes down to it, who am I going to take a chance on? A complete stranger or someone who is living there when I bought the property a couple months ago? The data says I ought to take a chance on someone who is not from this community. Now, again, maybe that's just the data that I have and that I am looking at in my markets and what star quality of parks I'm buying and this, that, and the other thing. However, boy, is that relevant data, because my best performing properties have been almost completely turned over. Seriously, I have an entire portfolio of almost 150 units that are almost 100% new. Seriously, it's the best collecting stuff I have. I have properties where I took chances on people who were living there as rentals. And it turns out all they wanted was a cheap price, and that was it. They don't fix their homes. They don't pay on time. They behave like renters that, air quotes, own their own home. And they do, because the name is on the title. Now I don't have control over that anymore. That's a big deal. And I actually made a podcast episode about this where I called it the 1/3 rule. 1/3 of people of original park-owned homes, they don't want to buy the home. 1/3 don't want to buy the home, really, and they won't leave. And then only about 1/3 of folks you actually want to consider. It turns out a giant portion of that 1/3 that you actually want to consider will end up letting you down. And it breaks your heart, because if you have a heart like I do, you want to make the world a better place like I do, you want everyone to succeed. And it's just not that way. There's an unbelievable amount of people who truly need affordable housing. And it is, in my opinion, our responsibility to fight to preserve and enhance the affordable housing units that we are in control of. And when 10 people need access to one unit and you have to make a really tough decision, who gets that unit? Unfortunately, that unit's got to go to someone who's going to pay, who's going to follow rules, and who's going to make the community better because they're there. They're going to treat their home right. They're going to fix their home right. They're going to be kind and courteous to their neighbors. They're not going to beg, lie, cheat, and steal, give you a warm and fuzzy story only to not actually come through and pay. Not that that's not a good person. Look, I've been there where I'm staring down a bunch of bills, deciding what it was that I'm going to pay and not pay that month. And as much as you want to help folks like that, sometimes having a reset is the best thing for them. Saying, hey, look, I will waive all your back rent. Just give me the keys, be on your way. You need a letter of recommendation, you got it. You need me to put some money in your pocket, you got it. But if they're just going to stay there to just stick it to you or stick it to whomever, sometimes you got to pull the plug on them. And again, it is the worst thing to do in this space, but it gets way worse when they own the home. So I will end it there. For more on selling park-owned homes, definitely check out the couple episodes that I have on that. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. And again, don't tell stories. Collect good data. What gets measured gets managed. And you'll find if you have really, really good data, decision-making becomes really, really, really easy. Seriously, a lot of stuff becomes absolute no-brainers and you roll your eyes and you're like, duh. But if you don't have that data, all of a sudden you're telling stories like, is there a monster in the house? Is there a robber? Should I fashion a weapon out of this little post next to me in this new house I just bought? No, you need to flash your business flashlight on the darkness, uncover what the heck is going on there, and Rent Manager can help you do that. Thank you again, Rent Manager, for letting me come and present at the Rent Manager Conference. I am a huge supporter of Rent Manager. By all means, folks, I'm not getting paid to say this. I just am really passionate about the software, and I hope you've gotten some great nuggets out of this. Ladies and gentlemen, make better decisions with better data. My name is Ryan Naris. Thanks for tuning in.
Entrepreneurs make mistakes, but with the overwhelming amount of free information out there, you don't have to be doomed to making those same mistakes. You just have to find a consolidated version of the most important information. What if I told you I'll gift you all of my DD mistakes I've made over the years for free? Just leave me a 5-star review, screenshot the review after it goes live, and email it to me at my website, archimedesgrp.com. Afterwards, join our Facebook group, Mobile Home Park Mastermind. You'll find hundreds of other mobile home park owners sharing ideas, contractors, and deals. It's free to join, and we would absolutely love having you join us.